So the last few classes of the meditation from Sinai, we spoke about different ideas of being mindful in different areas from creation of the world. We spoke about the idea how every moment of our time is very powerful and God's infusing energy to sustain everything in the world, including ourselves, every moment of the day. Today, we're going to take this one step further and see how we can make this, bring this part of our life, not just part of our life like we spoke last week, where we eat, sleep, and in our businesses, but also how we can bring the mindfulness and meditation into the world of the mitzvot, the commandments of the Torah. And this will bring the class full circle. You'll see it's really fascinating. Let's just take a look at the screen here. Meditation so far, we spoke about how it's a cognitive exercise, being mindful mostly. And now today we're going to be talking about more action-oriented. You know, if we behave a certain way, we'll start feeling that way as well. So that's kind of the idea. Okay. Let's take a look at exercise 6.1 on page 182. On a scale of 1 to 5, estimate the centrality of each of the following to Judaism. Action. Is action a very important thing in Judaism, or is it just semi-important? How about our values? Is values very important? What if I don't have much values, but I'm still practicing as a Jew? How about faith? Is faith a criteria? Do I have to have faith in order to fulfill the mitzvahs? Or I could be a non-believer, but still doing all the commandments the way I'm supposed to. And finally, mindfulness. Is mindfulness a mandatory step to fulfill the mitzvah, or is it just something that's secondary, that's an extra, or not? So this is what we're going to start off tonight's class with. We ask ourselves, how central is meditation to Judaism? So the interesting thing is, hello, Kreindl. The interesting thing is, if you look in text 1, the Mishnah, which means we're going back a very long time. The Mishnah is from after the destruction of the Second Temple. The Mishnah tells us in text 1 that the essential thing is not study, but deed, which means that action is actually the most important thing that we can do. If we had a choice of meditating about something or actually doing it is the most important thing. There's actually a great discussion that goes on in the Talmud, discussing what is more important. Is it studying the Torah or fulfilling the mitzvah? And it goes back and forth until the conclusion is that the only reason why you're studying the Torah is to know how you could fulfill the mitzvah. So if you do the mitzvah without studying the how to do it, or somehow you know how to do it, then the main thing is the action. If you do all the studying and you learn how to do it, but then you don't do the final deed, you don't do the action, then kind of miss the main point here. So from this note, we see the idea, from the text 1, we see this idea that the most important thing is the deed. Now we're going to give you the counter argument to this, that maybe meditation is important. We look at the screen, the effort to purposefully focus your mind and develop a deeper awareness to achieve desired result. Now watch, we're going to change the words very simply. Develop a deeper awareness to achieve a desired result. So we're not looking for our goal, but we're looking for concrete results. Judaism always wants, we need to know the results. What's the bottom line, right? What's the outcome? So the effort to purposely focus your mind, let's change the word your mind to your actions. effort to purposefully focus your actions and develop a deeper awareness to achieve a desired result. Right. So here you see the importance of how important actions actually are. So let's ask ourselves the following question. Again, you have this on page 184. Has the mitzvah been fulfilled if you have not had the right intentions? So let's give a practical example. Practical example would be, we do now this every Rosh Hashanah. The mitzvah of Rosh Hashanah is that you should hear the shofar. That's the mitzvah. When you hear the shofar, we make the blessing, we crown God to be our king. That's Happy New Year. This year and last year, we've always been doing this, but it's become more popular since COVID, to do the outdoor shofar blowing in the park. And people gather and we make the big blowing of the shofar, and it's beautiful. Now, what if there's a Jewish couple walking by and they actually weren't aware that today was Rosh Hashanah, but they happened to be walking by in the park and they heard the shofar blowing? Yeah, you can't block it out. Your ears hear everything going on. They heard the shofar. Have they fulfilled the mitzvah, even though they had no idea what they were hearing or what they were doing? Or do we believe that the mitzvah needs to be done with the right intent, with the mindfulness, knowing I'm fulfilling this mitzvah and understanding why we're doing the specific mitzvah that's being done? That's the question. Anyone want to pipe in?
Intention is certainly important.
Yes, it's definitely important.
Okay, so it depends on your level. You look at things like the tzaddik and the Rasha and everything else, but on different, we always forget the little two guys I always talk to about Passover, the little two guys in the corner. Those are the ones that don't understand or anything. At their level, they can do it. I did a paper between 10% and 90%. You cannot expect the 10% to do what the 90% can do.
That's right.
And that's why you need help from the rabbi or whoever, your family, whoever it is. You can't expect a person to go up to the 10th part of the ladder when he can only go, or she can only go to the third part of the ladder, the third step of the ladder, or the first step.
Right.
If you say something that they don't understand, you gotta wait until they understand that and then go to the next step.
Thank you, Michael. Now let's look at text number 2, and see what the Alter Rebbe writes in the Shulchan Aruch, in the Code of Jewish Law, of what's most important, the deed or the intention. Marilyn, you want to read for us text 2?
Okay. Let me make sure. Okay.
Page 185.
Okay. To fulfill a mitzvah obligation, we must actively intend to observe that mitzvah. Therefore, if we observe a mitzvah unwittingly or for a purpose other than to perform a mitzvah, we have not fulfilled the mitzvah at all. Some Torah authorities disagree and opine that mitzvah do not require intent and are fulfilled even when performed unwittingly. However, the final law sides with the former option.
Thank you. So, of course, we have two opinions on everything. And like Michael said, it really depends on what level a person's on. So the Code of Jewish Law is siding with the opinion that, like Marilyn said, it would be great if you could have intent, right? But you still fulfill the obligation on some level if you haven't had the intent, but at least you did the deed. So let's look on the screen. Has the mitzvah been fulfilled? If there was no intention, but the action was done, versus you had the right intentions and you fulfilled the mitzvah, you did the action. So the Alter Rebbe decides that purpose is actually beyond behavior. In other words, what is the purpose of a mitzvah? Why are we doing this? If we're fulfilling the mitzvah for myself, let's take a different mitzvah, not shofar, but let's take a mitzvah of doing charity. We're helping all the refugees right now coming out of Ukraine. Am I doing that because I have a godly given duty to help them? Or am I doing it because I have pity on them and I'm such a kind-hearted person, so I want to give from what I have to these poor Ukrainians, right? So one is a mitzvah, and the other one is I'm just doing it because I'm a nice person, but it's not necessarily a commandment.
Well, the intention is to help them. Even if it's not, if it's not a mitzvah, the intention is that you're trying to help them, and ultimately it is a mitzvah.
Yeah, so you're definitely doing a good deed.
Even if you're not looking it upon as a mitzvah, you are helping people in need.
You're helping people in need 100%. Let's take an example of the holiday of Purim that's coming up. So we have 4 obligations on the holiday of Purim next week that we need to fulfill. We have to hear the Megillah reading. We have to have a feast, a meal. We give money to the poor, and we exchange gift exchange of food items from one person to the next. So what if I decided that I want to read the Megillah reading today? It's a great thing. It's a positive thing. I'm learning, I'm studying, I'm reading sacred text, reading the story of Esther. It's a good thing, but I have not fulfilled the Purim obligation. The commandment I haven't fulfilled, right? So in other words, my point is that oftentimes we do very, very great things, very, very commendable things, and you're complimented that you're doing this amazing thing, but yet we haven't fulfilled the mitzvah obligation. We haven't fulfilled what we were asked to do. We did something that is genuinely good, and it's good for us to do, and it's still a good thing. No one's saying that the good thing is not good anymore. We're not saying that the good thing that was done is a bad thing. It is a good thing, but the obligation that was accomplished, the obligation that we were under when we were told from up high to do X, Y, and Z, that obligation was not fulfilled. Now let's go a little deeper, and everything's going to unwind, and everything will fall into place. We're going to understand more of what a mitzvah is. So we have exercise 6.2 on page 186. And exercise is to identify 2 mitzvahs that you recently performed, in an interpersonal mitzvah and a ritual one. In the chart below, describe the motivation that propelled to perform the mitzvah and what you were trying to accomplish. The point of this exercise is to help us understand, when we do a mitzvah, what are we trying to accomplish? Are we just trying to check off the box? Oh, I have to put on tefillin, I have to pray, I have to give charity, I have to light Shabbat candles, I have to, it's things we have to do? Or are we doing it because we have a different purpose? We're trying to accomplish something else. So what is it that we're trying to accomplish? And the answer lies in the coming text, that a mitzvah is the recipe for a relationship between us, the Jewish people, and God. That is the purpose. So we'll go through this on the screen. A mitzvah, the word mitzvah in Hebrew, we translate it as a commandment. Yes, it means a commandment, but in Judaism, there are many different layers of understanding the meaning of a word and what a word represents and what a mitzvah represents. So the Zohar tells us that the word mitzvah also can be translated as tzavsa v'chibur, which means connecting. So imagine when you do a mitzvah, you're actually connecting. Who are you connecting with? The person performing with the one who requested you to do it. The same way when a person who's close to you asks you to do something and you do it, you feel connected with them because you did it, whether it's you went grocery shopping or you're helping with chores in the home, whatever it is, someone close to you, if it's a spouse, a sibling, a good friend, asks you to do something and you do it, that's a way that you become close to the person, right? It's a love language, acts of kindness, what's it? Acts of service. Acts of service is a love language. And through these acts, we connect with one another. So our relationship with God is done through us performing these mitzvahs. Let's look at text number 3, which will help us understand this. Jeffrey, you want to read?
The word mitzvah means a connection, as in the Aramaic term savat,
Tap.
attached, join. One who
Mhm.
performs a mitzvah bonds with God every self,
Very so.
every very self, for God is the issuer of that commandment. This is the significance of our sage's statement. The reward of a mitzvah is the mitzvah. The bonding of the mortal who performs the commandment with the infinite God who issued the commandment is itself the greatest reward.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jeffrey.
Yes.
The idea of a mitzvah, the concept that a mitzvah is a way for us to connect, teaches us a whole new idea. So many places in the Torah it says the reward of a mitzvah is a mitzvah. There you go. The reward of a mitzvah is a mitzvah. The quote here is from Ethics of Our Fathers in the Mishnah, where our fathers taught us the reward. If you do a mitzvah, you get to do another mitzvah. You know, growing up, we always thought this is such a silly thing, right? The reward for listening to your father is you have to listen to him again. Like, really? No, you want a real reward, right? But here, after studying this text that we just read, you read this differently. The reward of the mitzvah is the relationship. Ah, now we understand. When I do a mitzvah, now what's my reward? I'm closer to you, right? So now I listen to my father. My reward is not that I have to listen to him again. My reward is that now I'm bonding with him, right? That's my reward. So every time one of us do a mitzvah, it's actually building this relationship between us and God. That's how powerful the mitzvah is. Now for this, God has a lot of interest in us. God has invested so much in us, and he just wants us to do mitzvahs again and again and again. So what God does is God's desire for a mitzvah makes us a relevant person. If God has no interest in us, and God couldn't care for us to do a mitzvah, then what relevance are we in creation? What's the purpose? What's our goals? What are we doing here? What's our long-term plan? We're just here to live, to work, have a retirement plan, retire, and then, what's the plan?
Then you die.
Then we die. The part nobody wants to talk about. So earlier in the course, we spoke about how our bodies have a soul, and our body without a soul is lifeless, pointless. So let's use that same analogy with the mitzvah. The mitzvah is the body. The mitzvah that has to happen. The coin needs to get into the charity box. The poor person needs to get the dollar. We have to do our prayer. We have to do Shabbat. We have to eat kosher. That's the body. That needs to happen. That's the action. It's dry, it's physical, it's mundane. What's the soul of the mitzvah? The soul of the mitzvah is what brings the mitzvah life. It brings it alive. it takes that deed, that action, which was so simple, of just an arm taking a nickel and putting it into a charity box. The soul brings that alive, creates that relationship between us and God. So the intent, the kavanah, the mindfulness, the meditative concept of what we're doing when we're performing the mitzvah is the soul of the mitzvah. We have here on the screen pictures of two different types of flowers. One looks kind of dried out, and the other looks pretty, solid. One looks neglected, and the other one looks like it's cared for and is loved for. If someone brought you a bouquet of flowers, which one would you want to have? Obviously, the one that looks like it's been prepared, it's fresh, just for you, right?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
It depends with the intent that came with it.
Correct. And some people don't like flowers. Some people like dried out flowers.
No, it has nothing to do with the flowers. It has to do with the intent behind the flowers that were brought to you.
Right.
You know, a
Correct.
child can pick
Yeah.
a flower and walk, 5 miles. By the time they get to home to give their mom the flower, it's droopy. Here, mom, I picked you this flower, and the flower is half dead. That's a beautiful thing.
That's very
Thank you.
special. That's very special. Correct.
And
That
it-
is very special.
and you can look at both of them and say, one is considered like an old person against one who's a younger person. I know I just brought that up in my head, and it just came up in my head. The dry one is one that's
And through life.
is losing its ability to live. So it's an old individual. That beautiful thing that you see in the tray, whatever it is is the younger one.
So let's
both
use these
beautiful.
pictures as an analogy to try to bring out this point of the mitzvah. That the deeper the feelings we have towards this, the greater the impression's going to be, right? Even if it's a one stem flower that's hanging over that a child walked 5 miles with. It's the deeper the feeling is, and that the greater the impression is, right? If a lazy husband picked a flower from the backyard because he was lazy to buy a bouquet, that wouldn't be appreciated, right? So the deeper the feeling that goes into it and the thoughts, that's what makes this impression so great. So the same idea, the same concept is reflected in our relationship between us and God. The relationship between us and God is the more feelings we put into the mitzvah, the greater the impression the mitzvah has, the greater the impact the mitzvah has. And our love to God and our relationship becomes much stronger, right? If a person goes to synagogue out of guilt or goes to synagogue out of joy, very different experiences. So the more mindful we are of the mitzvah that we're doing, the greater the impression of the mitzvah is.
Mhm.
Let's take this to a step further. Text number 4. Martha, would you like to read page 187?
Okay, yes, this is the inner significance of the blessing recited prior to performing a mitzvah. Blessed are you who sanctified us, Kedushanu, with his mitzvot. In Hebrew, the term Kiddush means both sanctification or betrothal. Through performing a mitzvah, we are bound to God like a man betrothing his wife for the sake of being intimately united with each other. As the Torah states regarding the bonding of the first human couple, he shall cleave to his wife and they shall become one flesh. Genesis 2:24. When we study the Torah or perform a commandment, we achieve a similar, indeed an infinitely deeper and truer unity between our soul, along with all its elements, and God's absolutely infinite light.
Thank you. So we notice the word kiddush a lot, right?
Mhm.
In synagogue, we have a kiddush that we eat. When a person is in mourning, they say a kaddish. That's a kaddish that we say. Then there's something called the kiddushin. The kiddushin is under a chuppah, under the chuppah canopy. When a couple's getting married, they become betrothed to one another. Then we see the word also a lot in blessings. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kiddishanu. Kiddishanu again. So the word kiddishanu and kadesh means a lot. What are these meanings? So the word literally means holy. Now, the word could also mean kiddushin. When we're betrothing a wife, you're not saying that she's holy. You're saying that she's betrothed. She becomes exclusive to you, right? It's very different. And you become exclusive to her. So every time we do a mitzvah, we say a blessing before the mitzvah. Almost every mitzvah has a blessing. We thank God for giving us the commandment in order to perform this mitzvah. Why are we saying a blessing before we do it? Before we eat, before we drink, before we blow shofar, before we put a mezuzah on the door. Everything is a blessing. Before we put on tefillin, before we light Shabbat candles. Why can't you just do the mitzvah? Why does it have to come with a blessing prior to doing the mitzvah?
To connect with God.
The blessings actually are instituted by the rabbis many years after the giving of the Torah. And the reason was because the rabbis wanted us to teach ourselves, be mindful of what we're about to do. We asked earlier if meditation is a Jewish thing, and it's inherently ingrained into the inner folds of Judaism, which is why we have a moment of meditation before we do a mitzvah. That moment is the blessing. And the blessing is saying that through this mitzvah, I'm betrothing myself to you, to God. And that's our relationship. So every time we make a blessing, that's a meditative moment, a mindfulness moment. Unfortunately, for some people, I should say, it becomes so ritual that they don't even stop to think anymore what they're saying, right? But this is where it comes from. Like sometimes you got to go back to the roots and remind ourselves what it's all about. I want to take a moment and play a video with Rabbi Wolf, who's going to talk about this concept of meditation and connecting with God a little bit more in depth. Okay, so stay tuned. Make sure you can hear the sound. If you can, let me know.
Pleasant thoughts can instill joy. Your imagination can conjure up many beautiful things, and yet it can't match reality. The actual experience in real time, in real life, surpasses imagination. Gently close your eyes and become aware of how powerful your imagination is. Conjure up a picture of yourself flying through the air with ease, comfortably, like a bird. The imagination allows you places and experiences that are beyond the laws of nature, because imagination comes from a very profound spiritual source. Bring to mind someone you love profoundly. a child, a spouse, a good friend, whichever. Become aware of their absence. They are away from you, perhaps on a holiday, perhaps living in another city. In your mind, give them a hug, embrace them. How does that feel? Doesn't it feel wonderful? And yet, if you were to meet them personally, one-on-one, and embrace them in reality, would not that be even much more powerful? That's why when people are absent and our connectedness is breached, we yearn and want their presence. And when they are with us, we can create that presence, the wonderfulness of being truly one. Imagine the thought of doing a mitzvah, saying a nice word to someone who needs encouragement. And yet, all the good intentions don't measure up to actually saying it in real time, in real life. When we do a mitzvah in real time and real life, we embrace Hashem. We touch what we call atzmos, the very essence of godliness. Make a personal commitment after this session to experience an embrace of God through doing a very real mitzvah.
Yes. Thank you, Rabbi Leibowolf. We could end here if we chose to end here. But we want to go one dimension, one level deeper than just saying that the mitzvah, that if I meditate before I do the mitzvah, that will allow me to connect. But rather that the connection, the mitzvah itself, is actually something that will make, how do I say this? That it's not that meditation is a preparation for the mitzvah, but the mitzvah itself is a meditation. The mitzvah itself is something that's going to actually create that connection. We have here, mitzvahs require meditation. What does that mean that mitzvah requires meditation? That the mitzvah itself is the meditation. What does it mean the mitzvah itself is for meditation? Let's look at text number 5. Jonathan, you want to read for us? Text 5, page 189.
Yes.
Okay.
The sages state that the mitzvot were given only to refine the person. The purpose of the mitzvot is not to benefit God, but rather to benefit humankind, to keep them safe from harm, to shield them from negative beliefs and base character traits, to remind them of the miracles and wonders of the Creator, and to help them know God. The Midrash employs the term tzaref for refining, which usually refers to refining silver. This informs us that the mitzvot refine mortals in a similar way to the way a silversmith refines silver. Silver refinement is a purposeful task done for the sake of removing all impurities. Similarly, the mitzvot are designed to remove every harmful belief from our hearts, to inform us of the truth, and to enable us to be constantly mindful of the truth.
Thank you. So this is from Nachmanides, where he's saying that the mitzvahs that we do are not only for us to have a relationship with God, but it's actually to refine us as human beings, to make us a better person. Where do we see this? And this is what Nachmanides is saying, that it will keep us safe, will shield us from negative beliefs, bring on miracles, and it will help us to know God. This is a big game changer for us. Let's continue to see what Maimonides writes in text number 6. Marilyn, would you like to read?
Each of the 613 commandments exists either to communicate a correct view or to dismiss an unhealthy view, to communicate a rule of justice or to ward off an injustice, to endow people with a noble moral quality or to warn them against a negative moral quality.
Thank you so much. Again, you see here where Maimonides is writing similar to Nachmanides, that the more mitzvahs we do, the more refined we will be, the better of a person we're going to be. Let's start talking more about the power of action. Take us into the next, segue straight into the next part. The more God knows, there's no one that knows a human being better than God does. God created us, and God knows best what actions will refine us as a human being. So he gave us specific commandments that God felt would make us the best human being we could possibly be. If I had to guess, what was the most common thing that the Rebbe mentioned, or the most often mentioned? The Rebbe would say that the word Torah, what does the word Torah mean? Normally, we loosely translate it as the Bible. The Bible is really a Greek word. The Greeks translated it because when they translated the Torah for the first time, they didn't know what to call the book. So they called it the book. The Bible means the book, if you translate it to English. The Rebbe said the word Torah means Lashon Hora. It means a guidebook. It's a guide to the human being how to live the most quality life possible in this world. And that's the purpose of the Torah. And that's the purpose of the actions. And the more actions we do, the better of a person we are, the more refined we are. Let's look at text number 7. This is from the Sefer HaChinuch. The Sefer HaChinuch, Chinuch literally means to educate. So he writes many, many fascinating ideas about how to best influence ourselves and how to best be our best behaviors. Jeff, you want to read text 7?
Get over.
Sure.
I got.
And now, my child.
And now, my child, I will enlighten you to appreciate the Torah and its precepts. You are influenced by your behavior, and your feelings and thoughts consistently follow your actions, whether for the positive or the negative. Your actions have the power to overcome the negative inclination within you, since the attitudes of your heart are influenced by your behavior.
Very good. Thank you. So he's actually, what he's writing is, let's look at the screen. It'll make it clear for us to understand. So what comes first? First, we say, I'm a great, kind, generous person, and then we give something away. Or first we donate something, and that is what makes us a kind person. So when we don't think too deep into this, our first thing is, I'm a nice person, I have another dollar, I'm generous, I'm going to give it to you. What we're saying in text number 7 is the opposite. your feelings will follow your behavior. First, you act. First, got to act. First, give. First, do something, and that feeling and that kindness will come only afterwards. So the more times you do kindness, the more kind of a person you become, right? And this will be with any act that you do. The more you do the acts of the mitzvahs, the more you feel that refinement more and more and more. So, oftentimes when I have these discussions with people and they tell me, I don't really feel like I'm spiritually on that level. You're on that level. I'm not on that level. And I always say exactly this answer. First, do it, and then we'll talk. Because I know that once a person will put on tefillin, and once they come to shul, that will refine them to want to do it again. I want to do it more, right? Not that we say, oh, I'm not inspired, so I'm not going to do it. But the opposite. If I do it, I will become inspired, right? It's a whole different way of thinking. If we meditate on this idea for a few moments, we'll realize how many areas of our life is like this. It can be in our job, our relationship with our children, our relationship sometimes with ourselves, the way we think of ourselves. Sometimes all we need to do is actually do that action, do that deed, and that will start turning us into that person that we want to be. Let's look at this exercise on 191. The first one is slouch your shoulders and frown for 10 seconds. And how do you feel? Right? It's like curl under your blanket on a cold winter day and tell me you're happy, right? No, it's just a feeling of like a rainy day. It's that, feeling down, feeling ugly, feeling, low. And the second line says, stand tall and straight, the wide smile and arms open for 10 seconds. And how do you feel? Right? Sometimes you're feeling down, just put on music and start dancing. It's a good chance if you start dancing, you'll also start smiling. You'll also start feeling happier inside. You'll start feeling, forget some of the worries and the anxieties that are overcoming us. So sometimes we just have to do it, and then those feelings will follow. I think this is a very, very, very important concept for us to remind ourselves, because we have many opportunities to do a mitzvah. Mitzvahs are very easy to do. But very often we feel like, it's not for me, it's for someone else, or we push it off, not now, we're not feeling it, we're not feeling Jewish, we're not feeling inspired. But we have to start looking at it from a different perspective. We have to look from a perspective, I'm not feeling generous, let me give a nickel. I'm not feeling inspired, let me open up a prayer book and say a prayer. Once we do that action, and then we'll start feeling the feeling that's supposed to come afterwards. After we do this, we will begin to see that there are side effects that follow. We start becoming a different person. It's really fascinating. The Rebbe talks about this in text 8. Marsha, you want to read text 8 for us, please?
Sure. The
Oh,
main
right.
focus within Judaism is action, which entails practically fulfilling the mitzvot. At the same time, each Torah-based action has an effect on a person's character. Learning Torah and fulfilling mitzvot refine the mind and emotions, as repeatedly emphasized in the works of Maimonides, who served as a guide for the perplexed of his generation and continues to serve as a guide for truth seekers in all subsequent eras.
Thank you.
Wow.
Yeah, and Rebbe encouraged this constantly. Many people would come to the Rebbe for advice, for blessings, and the Rebbe would almost always try to find something that's easy for the person to do, because we start with the easy stuff. It's so much easier. It's, why it doesn't have to be difficult. It doesn't have to be life-changing. But doing even something that's easy will refine us and make us that person who we want to be. It's amazing to see how every mitzvah has something that we can meditate on. Every mitzvah has a purpose. Every mitzvah has its agenda. If we look through this exercise on page 193, we have here a few options of mitzvahs. We're going to read through a meditative idea of each of these mitzvahs, and then you'll come back and you'll see, you'll get to see it. It's very interesting. So in the chart below, record what you might consider the meditative agenda of the listed mitzvahs. So we have charity. What do you think? What would you meditate before you give charity?
Just gratitude for my good fortune.
Okay,
And
that's good.
I don't know.
That's good. Honor parents. Observe
Gratitude.
Shabbat.
Mhm.
Tefillin and mezuzah. Okay, we're going to read the next few texts, and you'll see how the Sefer HaChinuch and the author brilliantly gives us simple yet depth ways of meditating this idea. So let's take text number 9. Charity. The root of the mitzvah to lend to the poor. That God desired that his creatures become accustomed to train themselves in the characteristic of kindness and mercy. For these are praiseworthy characteristics. And through training their bodies to act according to positive traits, they will be worthy of receiving goodness. For as we have explained, goodness and blessings fall exclusively on the good. If it were not for this benefit, God could provide the poor with their needs without us. Rather, out of sheer kindness, the blessed God made us his messengers so that we can become meritorious through the process. Think about this. God could have made everyone have enough money. The whole concept that there are poor people would never exist. Now, if there was a world without poor people, what would the world look like? It means I don't have to give anything to anyone. So besides that, we become selfish people, right? Because I have nothing, no one needs anything. It says that God will give those that give, right? This is the quote he says. Goodness and blessings fall exclusively on the good. Goodness and blessings. If you want a blessing, be a blessing to someone else, and a blessing will come upon you. Now, if you can't be a blessing to someone else because there's no poor people around, then there goes your blessings, right? So we stop and we think, wow, not just that I'm the giver, but we think how great God is, that he enables us to give. He created a poor person so I can give in order for me to receive other blessings that I need to have on my shoulders. This is amazing. God is just, that's how kind God is. Very interesting idea. Let's look at text 10. Another very interesting. The root of the commandment for an individual to honor their father or mother is that it is fitting for a person to acknowledge and return kindness to those who provided goodness, and to avoid becoming a selfish, ignorant, and evil and repulsive attribute in the eyes of God and the mortals alike. The mitzvah is designed to spur us to contemplate that our parents are the material cause of our existence in this world. It is therefore truly fitting to honor them in every way and to provide them with every benefit that is within our ability. For they brought us into the world and also toiled on our behalf numerous ways when we were young, right? So if we just think for a moment, how did I get here on earth? Oh, my parents. I'm indebted to my parents. If not for them, I would not exist. I would never make it to earth, right? So all of a sudden, I realized, okay, this is not just that, my parents carpooled me when I was young, so I have to carpool them when they're older and they can't drive. No, it's not that responsibility. That's that also. But what's the meditative thing behind it all? What's the root of everything? Is that we're grateful to them that we're here in this world. If not for them, we would never be here. Let's look at Shabbos. Text 11, page 196. Marilyn, you want to read?
The root of this commandment to abstain from work on Shabbat is that we should free ourselves from our occupations to honor the day of Shabbat, thereby instilling within ourselves belief in God's creation of the universe. For this belief is the core to which every foundation of our religion is attached.
See that? We every single week, we stop everything we're doing to remind ourselves that God created the world in 6 days. That's how important this is. Unbelievable. Let's look at text number 12, page 196. Tefillin. Let's see. Among those commandments from God that are for the sake of molding thoughts in order to serve him in purity is the commandment of tefillin. Tefillin are to be placed on the body in locations corresponding to the brain and the heart, organs that are referred to as the sets of intellect and perception. Laying tefillin and contemplating their purpose leads to dedicating all thoughts to the good and leads to constantly remembering to be careful to calibrate all deeds in righteousness and justice. Again, the mitzvah is a mitzvah, the commandment is an important commandment, but the purpose, the things we think about when we do it, what it brings us to, right? Text number 13, the mezuzah. So we all have a mezuzah, we know what it is, it's beautiful, but what's the deeper meaning behind it?
You
must
want
be-
this? No, okay, sorry, Rabbi.
What?
They're both the tefillin and the mezuzah bring you right to Hashem. When you do the tefillin, the first thing you think about is the Shema, as far as I'm concerned, and the mezuzah. Then God tells you the same thing. That the major prayer underneath which the Shema is the foundation that keeps you standing and knowing who's above you, and that he's there when you fall down, and when you don't feel so good, and when whatever it is, he picks you up. It's
That's
in
100%,
it's
100%.
exactly in there.
100%. I just want to bring out the meditative idea of what we can contemplate on a little different when we do each one of these mitzvahs, you know what I mean? So if you look at text 13, it says about the mezuzah. We must be careful to observe the mitzvah of mezuzah, for it is an obligation that is constantly incumbent upon everyone. Okay, we all know that. He says further, through observing this precept, whenever we enter or leave our homes, we encounter the symbol of God's unity and recall our love for him. This activity shakes us awake from our spiritual slumber, our obsession with material vanities, so that we recognize that nothing we gain lasts forever except knowledge of the creator of the universe. This will spur us to regain proper mindful awareness and to make upright decisions. So when we leave the house, we see our mezuzah, it reminds us of what's most important in our life, the spirituality. That's what's most important. And we shouldn't be busy thinking about the more vain, the mundane type of things. Okay, so just on the screen, we have these ideas that we spoke about. These are just samples of ideas. In the appendix, there are many more things that you can continue to read, things that are help us with our mindfulness, help us with serving Hashem in a more meaningful way, in a way that can build a relationship between us and God, and something that is so meaningful. The Alter Rebbe writes in the Tanya one of the analogies he uses for the meditation that comes together with the mitzvah is a bird with wings. And he tells us that a bird walking on the floor is a beautiful bird, and it's alive, and it's healthy, and it's great. It's an amazing bird. But if the bird doesn't use its wings to fly up high, then it's not really a bird, right? There are birds and then there are birds. If you want to fly high, you got to use your wings. So the mitzvah is like the bird. You do it, you do the mitzvah, you did the mitzvah, the bird's the bird. But when you use the intent, when you meditate before you do it, when you contemplate while you're doing it, and you're mindful of the mitzvah and what it's accomplishing, then you're taking this mitzvah and you're giving it wings. Wings, it can soar high up and accomplish so much more than just if it's on the ground, right? A bird that's on the floor, it doesn't have a bird's eye view. He has a view from 3 inches from the floor. But a bird that's using its wings, he has a bird's eye view. He can really see everything the way it is. So if we can pause and ask ourselves, what's the meaning of a mitzvah? We will say that it's having a relationship with God. And in order to have that relationship with God, we have to be mindful of the act, the mitzvah, of what we're doing, what we're accomplishing, what we're trying to really get through. I want to look at on page 199. It says Jewish mindful awareness practices. Much of our decision making and behavior is done unconsciously, disconnected from our true intention. Mindful awareness practices help us align our reactions with our core values and our greater purpose. Bringing these primary motivations to the front of our minds makes it more likely that our words, actions, and responses, particularly during challenging moments, are consistent with our principles and in line with our goals. Studies show that mindful awareness practices impact health, well-being, and capacity for learning. Many Jewish religious practices also serve the role of focusing us on our greater purpose and core values in life. The following text highlights some of these practices. So there's more readings that you can do that will help bring us to this concept, which really, once we master this, we become a true master. I'm going to play the key points of tonight's lesson. And then again, we like to conclude every course with a preview of the next class that will begin after Pesach.
Lesson 6. Mind and Matter. The influences of meditation on practice and of practice on meditation. 1. Although Judaism emphasizes action over all else, the active performance of the mitzvot have a meditative quality too. 2. Mitzvot, as acts of service to God, bridge the divide between mortal mankind and the infinite God, and mitzvot serve to establish a relationship with God. 3. This meditative intent that motivates mitzvah performance is what makes them meaningful. 4. Mitzvot also personally benefit the person performing them. 5. Our actions and behaviors shape our mindsets and attitudes. 6. Each mitzvah serves as a meditative function to shape our moral and spiritual perspectives and to develop positive attitudes.
Okay, I want to just say one story quickly before we go to our preview of the next class. So there was one of these great Hasidim that studied a lot of Kabbalah and a lot of Chassidus, who lived in the times of the Rebbe Maharash in the early 1900s. And he came in for a private audience with the Rebbe. And the Rebbe asked him, "What are you learning?" So he says, "What am I learning? In the morning, I spend 3.5 hours studying deep Chassidic texts, and I meditate on it, and I meditate on the greatness of God and the greatness of God's creations." And the Rebbe is, very impressed. Okay, what do you do in the evening? So it says, in the evening, I think about how great the world is. And again, he's telling the Rebbe different things that he meditates on, all about the greatness of God. So the Rebbe tells him, you spend so much time thinking about God. When do you have time to think about yourself? That was the Rebbe's response. And the Chassid took the word so to heart. He understood, obviously, the meaning of the Rebbe was telling him, like, my friend, you're meditating so much, but you missed the boat. The point is not to be meditating about God. You should be meditating how you can connect with God. You're thinking about God as abstract, not as it's part of your life. And when he woke up from his faint, the Rebbe told him, my point wasn't to shock you that you should just, fall unconscious. My point was to push you into action. The chassid who shared the story, he shared how his whole life he was brought up in a certain way, that we study and we think about God and we serve God, but it wasn't about a relationship between him and God. It was all about God. And he looked at himself like, I'm a nobody, I'm a nothing, everything's about God. And he served God, and he was an amazing person for serving God. But the Rebbe was telling him that Chassidus teaches us this added level. It's not just that we're doing the mitzvah for God. We're doing the mitzvah for ourselves. We are part of this story. God created us. God wants us to meditate. Meditate's important. Being mindful is very important. But we have to keep ourselves part of the story as well, not to exclude ourselves. Sometimes we meditate and it's about everything else except ourselves. And then we come back to reality and we have to face ourselves again. The point here is that action is very important. Action that comes together with the mindfulness is very important. And if we can bridge the two of them together and create this relationship between God, that it's important to God, but there's great benefit for me as well in this relationship. So we're going to play this next preview for 60 seconds. And then if you'd like, there's a quiz also if you want to test yourself on how much you remember.
Beyond the Big Ten, the Torah has 603 more commandments. Beyond religious practice, like Passover and Yom Kippur, much of Jewish law is surprisingly devoted to civil life, like commerce, neighbors, and damages. But every society establishes civil laws. So what makes these laws uniquely Jewish? A common goal to all civil systems is to create a safe and civil society. However, these civil laws are designed to create something else. Something that can only be identified by pinpointing the remarkable Jewish values on which Jewish law is based. Something, when discovered, revolutionizes your approach to everyday life. Join us for Beyond Right and discover the values that shape Judaism's civil code.
There you go.